NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome in Rose City to the Soccer Made in Portland podcast. I'm Ryan Clark, joined by Chris Reifer. And Chris, it was a rough weekend, to say the least, for the Portland Timbers specifically. They lost 5-1 in Atlanta in a game that was as bad as many people in the soccer community feared. Thiago Almada did what Thiago Almada does and lit the world on fire. He is, I would say, the early favorite for MLS MVP and has his eyes firmly on a jump to Europe whenever that opportunity arises. Who knows if he even makes it through this whole season. But he was terrific. The lone bright spot of that game, being a great moment for Tega Ikoba, scoring his first career goal as a professional at 19. He's the youngest Timbers goal scorer of all time. Family was there. So terrific story on that on OregonLive.com for folks who are interested. But, overall thoughts, Chris, on what was a pretty disastrous match for the shorthanded Timbers.
Really, really cool moment for Tega. And like that deserves all the discussion that it's getting, because it's just a really cool moment. He's a guy who came to Portland 5 years ago, sort of looking to come up through the Timbers Academy. And he has had a really rough go of the last year or so. He's had a number of things that have made his sort of integration into the first team much, much more difficult, that are totally outside his control, injuries and those kinds of things, that have made it more difficult than I think anybody would have hoped. And so for him to come in his first appearance in 2019, what year is it? 2023. Wow, that was wild. In his first appearance in 2023, after sort of facing and overcoming a lot of that adversity, to come in and to score a goal it's just awesome. You feel great for the guy. And it's one of those things where you want to see that kind of hard work and perseverance pay off. And there it was. And a really cool moment with his family, his brother jumping up and down. I think that's, you just love to see it. That puts a smile on your face. And you hope that is just the start of something for him. But even if it's not, like, nobody is ever going to be able to take that moment away from him. And that moment is a super cool one that he should cherish for the rest of his career, for the rest of his life. In terms of the rest, less cherishable.
You're telling me you don't want to cherish the rest of that match? You're not gonna, hang on to that?
Well, less cherishable. In terms of the rest, we've seen performances like this on the road before from the Timbers where they're just not competitive. They haven't happened a ton during Gio's period as coach, periodically, but not a ton. They happened a lot in John Spencer's. There were a lot of trips down to Texas where they just got pumped like 5 or 6-0. Happened periodically in Caleb Porter's. But this was that vintage of performance. Just awful. Back to front. Terrible. The team's defensive shape was an absolute joke. It looked a lot because they were pushing Mosquera so high. I would have described their defensive shape in many instances as like a 4-1-5, which is not a thing. That's not a soccer formation, but Bravo was playing a little bit deeper, so I'd put him on the back line. Diego Chara was like the one man midfield, and then there were 5 other players who were not doing much of anything defensively, and that's how you concede 5 goals. Is just nonsense defensively. I mean, the goal that Araujo scored was just, I mean, that should and frankly I would bet did keep Gio up at night. It's like a lazy play out of the back from Atlanta. Almada picks the ball up basically around midfield with absolutely no ball pressure whatsoever. They're like 4 Timbers attackers kind of in the neighborhood, but paying no attention whatsoever. Diego Chara, the Timbers, one midfield, he's the one, right? In the 4-1-5, he's the one. And he's like, hey, anybody? And so he goes to put pressure, which of course creates just like an enormous vacuum of space between the Timbers backline, which has questions to ask in its own right, and literally every other player on the field. and Almada just dumps one over to the top to Araujo, and that's it. Right, goal. That I mean, not even close. That's not even close to competitive soccer. And I mean, the injuries are a thing. We've talked about the injuries a lot. But I agreed with Gio's comments after the game, frankly, that you can't just look at the injuries to explain that performance. And, Gio took responsibility after the game, and that's fair. He's the head coach. He certainly has some on his shoulders. I think there are a good number of players who also need to be taking some responsibility for that performance. And I think there's responsibility to go around the club altogether. As I said last week, they are just not prepared to play MLS soccer right now. And I think if you're a Timbers fan, this is a really familiar feeling at this time of the year, right? Over the course of their entire MLS existence, what we're 12th season, 13th season, I don't know, a lot of seasons since 2011. The Timbers have averaged about 0.9 points per game in the first month of the season. In the first 4 or 5 games of the season. 0.9 points per game. That is wooden spoon soccer, folks. And this has been a problem across coaching staffs. It's been a problem across training staffs. It's been a problem across groups of players. It's been a problem now across GMs. And so you can't just say this is a matter of kind of a flurry of injuries. Flurries of injuries happen. But that's a totally inadequate explanation for this. The bottom line is that this has been an ongoing problem that the team has never addressed. And frankly, I think they've never addressed it because they've never taken it seriously. But here they are, now 12 years or whatever into this experience, and they average 0.9 points per game in this stretch of the season. And if, the Timbers overall average in their sort of overall records average about 1.4 points per game over the course of all their MLS regular season games. If they just sort of did that in March, they would have an overall record north of 1.5 points per game, which frankly would put them, over the course of that many seasons, would put them in the top handful of teams in the league. And so literally this problem that they've never taken seriously and never addressed is what makes them mediocre over, sort of in the middle of the pack in MLS, as opposed to in sort of the top pack. So, I mean, we'll see if they take it seriously, but there's no reason, there's no sign, there's no indication that they are.
And you have to think generally, I agree with you on the premise of what you're talking about, that, this is something that can't just be brushed away. It can't just be ignored. Like, oh, well, they start slow, but it's okay. They'll figure it out in the end, and maybe they'll make a run. I think it's an important thing, and it's no small thing that the Timbers have made 2 MLS Cup appearances under Gio Savarese. I say that's a big deal to make that type of run, but they didn't finish it. They don't have the MLS Cups to show for those exciting runs. Perhaps this could be the season where things go differently in terms of starting slow, and then maybe you keep being slow. You keep struggling.
They went differently last year.
Yeah. Last year was it took a pretty Herculean effort down the stretch for them to even get into the conversation, and then with one game to essentially get into the playoffs, they flubbed it. They didn't show up. They performed poorly. Gio called out individual players, whether through the media or in terms of not playing them. I mean, it was ugly, and there seemed to be like a genuine bubbling, rumbling culture issue under the surface of what was a really mediocre season. Then you add Evander, who's obviously an exciting player, but hasn't been able to get on the field this year. You don't make much else in the way of other changes beyond subtraction, taking Bill Tuiloma out of the picture, who I think could help this team right now. But, the money, as Ned Grabova has talked about, is going to hopefully go to improving the team overall in multiple areas. Frank Boley's on the way. It's very messy right now. I don't have a lot of confidence in the Timbers' ability to pull points out of games, no matter who they're playing at this point. You've got two prime examples. Like, St. Louis, I think, is a good team, but they've overperformed their talent.
And they're flat track heroes. They haven't played anybody yet.
They haven't played anyone. They come in to Portland and they pretty much control that game to a point where they win it without a whole lot of resistance. Then you go on the road and get drubbed by Atlanta. You've got LA Galaxy this Saturday, a team that has its share of injuries, and we'll talk about that matchup more. But that is shaping up to be another loss, just given the lack of personnel, given the form that this team is in. And that makes it so you have to start asking questions like, tactically, what is working and what isn't? Lineup wise, is it time to make drastic changes? Should you bring up some guys to help supplement from T2? Just kick the tires on some young guys who haven't had a chance yet. Draft picks like Noel Caliscan, who has looked good in training from what I've seen, but hasn't gotten a chance yet. Do you make even more drastic changes in like a young guy like Tega, who he hadn't really factored into that whole discussion about who's going to, fill in while Mora is recovering. But now Gio is talking about him getting more minutes, and there is a chance, I think, in the next few games of Tega starting. And that wasn't even in really the realm of possibility before, but, given the disappearing act of Niezgoda and given the inefficiency and kind of haphazardness of Nathan so far, you got to look there. And it obviously is not just the striker position. You look up and down this roster, you've got inefficient guys, aging guys, guys struggling to contribute in ways that they're expected to. Santi Moreno was a guy that you and I were both extremely high on coming into this season. He is not. He's been poor. He has not been up to the level that this team expects of him. And maybe that's going to take some time. Maybe his late start is going to, eventually come around to the level that's expected of him. But he's a guy that could be a difference maker for a middling team right now. Top to bottom, there are very few bright spots, you could say, and one of the bright spots is Juan Mosquera, who I think has been a revelation in the first few games and has been exciting. But he's not there on Saturday. He's so good that he's getting called up to the Colombian national team for important friendlies over in the Far East. So this is this is going to be a really rough game, I think, on Saturday against the Galaxy. And in general, just the vibes are not good with the Timbers right now.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just what we talked about all off season, as the Timbers weren't making moves. And yes, it's been exacerbated by some injuries, but that's why when somebody says, "Oh, this year is going to be different because we're not going to have as many injuries," you should say, "Really? Like, do you know that? or or is it sports and you're going to have injuries because that's what happens in sports sometimes. And the failure to prepare is preparation to fail, and that's what they're doing right now. And yeah, I mean, the thing that's maddening about all of this is that it was pretty foreseeable. And yes, there were reasons to hope that the Timbers could be better. I don't think those were unreasonable hopes. I don't think that the people who had those hopes were dumb or anything like that. But like, this was always pretty firmly well within the realm of possibilities. And we've seen it before, and we see it again. I reject entirely sort of the premise that it's okay and that it's healthy for the Timbers to kind of be banking on mid and late season runs to sneak into the playoffs and then hopefully make some noise in the playoffs. I frankly think a club that is leaning on that approach year in and year out just shows a lack of ambition. They're not trying to compete with LAFC. LAFC is ready to play. They're not trying to compete with the Seattle Sounders. Seattle Sounders are ready to play. Not trying to compete with Philadelphia Union. They're ready to play. And they came in ready to play on day one. They're not trying to compete with the best teams in MLS. If you're saying, we'll do what we can in the first few months, but summer's when we show up. I mean, if you're saying that, you're not trying to compete with the best teams in the league.
Yeah, and I think that there's potential for wasted opportunity here, right? With the fan culture that exists in Portland, with the reputation that Portland has around the league. I was on the Scarves and Spikes podcast last week with the guys that cover Atlanta United, and they mentioned something that I think hit an important point, and that was that for a while Portland has been viewed as the class of MLS, as one of the standard bearers of this league. And it seems to them, and I agree with this sentiment, that lately that's trending the opposite direction, that the Timbers are more of a middling franchise in this league compared to some of the newer teams that have cast themselves in a greater light and have had greater success. And Seattle playing in CCL is the obvious one, but you look at teams like LAFC, you look at what they're starting to build, although maybe this year isn't the best example, but Austin FC is another one, a younger club in the league that is building something strong. Philadelphia's surpassed them, LAFC surpassed them. Seattle is continuing to maintain its level of play and the quality of players they're bringing in. That should be a worry, I think, for Timbers fans. And, who knows if it's even on the radar of people in the front office, but, it's something that could happen moving back towards the middle or in like the lower tier of this league, because frankly, the resources aren't as robust as they are for clubs like LAFC, for clubs like Philly that are throwing money at the wall and it's sticking, it's working. So I'll
go a step further. I think that observation is obviously true. Like, I don't think you can rationally conclude otherwise. And like and it's true in a lot of different ways, but it's absolutely true that the league, and this is good for the league, has seen a number of new teams come in the course of the last, roughly most of the last decade, that have raised the bar in terms of resources coming into MLS and being used, and in any number of ways, on the field and off. You've seen that in supporters groups, from other supporters groups who have come in and have made quite the impact. And full credit to them. That is a good thing. And it's not that I think the Timbers supporters aren't up to that standard. I think they are. I think they very clearly are. I don't think that's the question at all. But I mean, then the rest of the league is sort of divided into two groups. Those who are trying to keep up, who are trying to also raise their level to match that. and to remain competitive. And I think the Sounders are clearly in that group. I think the Union are clearly in that group. I think there are a number of others. I think for the Galaxy, it's not for lack of trying. They haven't necessarily been successful, but they've at least tried to stay in that race.
Right. Yeah. I think trying is better than,
Not
being satisfied with middling. Yeah, completely.
And I think the Timbers have clearly fallen short in that respect. They have not done what they need to do to even try to stay in that race. You saw it in everybody talked last year about how it was pretty glaring seeing the Timbers near the bottom of MLS in terms of wage spend. They're probably a little bit higher this year because of Evander. That's it. But I mean, that's certainly an indication of it. And there are lots of things. I mean, there's an infrastructure race going on. The Timbers didn't enter it. There are resources being pushed into academies that haven't been done before, and clubs are really starting to see dividends from that. The Union are the shining example. They've thrown a ton of resources into their academy, and now they are feasting from it. The Timbers didn't do that, and so they're not. I think that's just it in many, many ways. The club has not done the things that they need to do, not made the investments that they need to do to get in this race. And I don't think there's any way to conclude otherwise.
It's rough going obviously early in this season. I don't think that this discussion is a reaction to that. I want to make that clear for listeners.
Part of it.
It's
part of it, but it's only part of it.
It's only a small part of it. This is something that, I heard people talk about this all throughout last year. And yeah. I'm sure Chris, as somebody who's been in the soccer community for a while, this is a conversation that's been ongoing for you for multiple years, just given where things are at. The MLS's back tournament championship thing was fun and exciting. And, it was a nice little situation for the team to have. The appearance in MLS Cup where they were hosting was awesome. And what the atmosphere there and the soccer culture that's in this town was indicative in that moment. And I will never personally forget being there at that moment when Felipe Mora tied the match late and that place shook. That to me that's what it's supposed to be. That's what it can be. And last year and then the early part of this year, I do not think is living up to that standard. And I think it's more than just results on the field and buy-in from players. It's investment, as you've talked about extensively, in everything from academies to higher quality players. This isn't a hobby, being in charge of a sports team. This is something you invest in order to create a product that people care about, that they are willing to spend money on, and that has success and brings people joy. That, that's the ultimate goal. Maybe because, the butts are still in the seats and the Timbers Army is still as awesome as it's ever been. Maybe that contributes to a potential lack of motivation, but I can't speak to that personally. It's frustrating, I think, for a lot of fans that I talk to, that this is the direction that things seem to be heading. That's not to say that it can't repair itself, that Portland can't,
of course it can,
renew itself as one of the class teams in MLS, but they can't do it with what's currently on the field, whether they are injured or not. And they can't do it with the approach that they've had, I think, in the last several years when it comes to putting the team together and that level of investment.
And although I absolutely agree with you that, just the early season struggles are not, that is not the overall problem. There is a much, 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 much larger picture here than that. But if LAFC looked at their record in March and was like, man, we're pretty good every other season of the year, but we really struggle to open seasons. If the Seattle Sounders saw that, if the Philadelphia Union saw that, if any number, Atlanta United even saw that, If NYCFC saw that, any number of other clubs, and there are clubs that get in the race and are still struggling and aren't doing it right. But if any of those teams saw this pattern, they would say that's a problem. We need to figure that out. That's a problem. And we need to throw everything that we have at solving that problem. And I've never seen that from the Timbers about this issue. And so I think it is, even though there's a much larger picture here, I think it's kind of reflective of the issue that there's just not the desire to reckon with these kinds of things and to be proactive about improving them. And, I very much hope that in the future there is.
How much do you think that the off-field issues that the club has faced impacts that in terms of the ability and time and even potentially motivation to make these type of necessary upward momentum moves?
I don't know. I worry that there is an impact, but it's not insofar as, they have to address all these other problems and so they can't address these problems. My bigger worry, frankly, is that there is, because many people on the outside have been critical of the club about other matters, that when they hear this criticism too, that they reject it out of hand because they think it's, haters going to hate. Instead of what it is, which is genuine and good faith and well-supported criticism.
I just gotta say, like that monotone reading of like Taylor Swift lyrics there was just sublime. Both of our significant others will appreciate that listening to this podcast, but all the other Swifties out there will as well.
That is my worry, that when the club sees people talking about this, that they just chalk it up to being haterade, and it's not. Like it's just not. This is an actual real problem. And I worry that when people point out these things, that they're just dismissed, and that sort of puts the club in a position where they're not dealing with these kinds of things because they're just dismissing them out of hand.
Shifting gears a bit to a team with better fortunes coming into this year, but no less,
slightly better fortunes. There's a lot to be said about the LA Galaxy.
Yeah, that yes, definitely. And that matchup will be compelling because of the injuries on both sides, the jersey choices. The Galaxy are going to wear green on Saturday, which is going to piss a lot of people off. It's already pissed a lot of people off. It makes very little sense to me, but okay. The Timbers will be in the rose uniforms, I would imagine. It's hard to imagine green.
We're just going to have like green on green.
That would be absolute chaos out there.
Yes.
So maybe
the Timbers will be in the rose.
Yeah, maybe
there's no question about this.
The pink smoke might be the move that's usually used at Thorns games. Maybe that's the move for the Timbies this week. We'll see how that goes. Speaking of those fine folks on the Thorns side, they are about to start their season, and they play Orlando on Sunday, one day after the Timbers face a tough one with the Galaxy. Both games at Providence Park, both afternoon games. It'd be nice if the weather was a little bit better for something like that. It's going to be cold and wet, which sucks, but people will still be out there cheering their heads off on both days for the clubs. Important moment for the Thorns in many ways. The beginning of the Mike Norris era after everything that went on in the offseason with Rian Wilkinson and all of the other controversy that has swirled around that club in the past year plus, the oncoming sale being a major distraction. It's an important moment, all of that aside, for the players to celebrate their achievement in 2022 with the raising of that banner at Providence Park. Their third championship, that third star above the logo, which, side note, does not appear in the logo in FIFA, but is on the uniforms in FIFA. So that's a start. I've got a few gripes with how they're portrayed in FIFA generally, but
you and the internet.
Yeah, me and the internet. I am the internet. The the team has a very important moment to celebrate on Sunday, and these players deserve it for more than the fact that they went through all of this stuff. It's a moment of celebration for how great they are as a group, as a soccer team, right? They have an opportunity to reach that pinnacle again this year because they bring back pretty much the entire team, add a couple of rookies in there, and you're looking at a team that is the odds-on favorite to win the NWSL championship again in 2023. That game will be played at a neutral site. I don't think will be DC. I think they'll switch it up, maybe go down to LA, perhaps San Diego, somewhere sunny. If Jessica Berman is hearing this, that would be
Please.
nice. Please.
Although it wasn't bad in DC last year.
No, I loved.
Certainly had a great time.
Yeah, I had an awesome time in DC. Visited my brother. It was a good time. But my personal desires for the location of the championship game aside, the Thorns are very likely to be back there again if they play their cards right. It's a weird year, obviously, because of the World Cup. There's going to be a stretch where the vast majority of this team's contributors are not here. Its best players will not be here. So it's going to have players, young players, step up. And I've heard a lot of great things about Reina Reyes, about Izzy Diakia, and about Lauren Kozel, the three rookies that were signed, or I should say, two of them were signed. One of them,
yeah, how about that?
One of them, Miss Reyes, has yet to be signed, which is interesting. The club has spoken to me about this and essentially explained it that she was not able to start her signing period, which every rookie that's drafted into NWSL has a specific signing period that starts when they report to camp. She was injured coming into camp, so her report day was later than the rest of them. But now we're coming into Sunday, and she's not on the roster yet. Reina Reyes, your top pick, who you feel like is going to be a regular contributor. She's
especially during that World Cup period.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, a likely starter for a good stretch of the season.
100%. And you need her to get ingratiated as soon as possible. So that's, I would say, the biggest question mark. But everything else is in place. You have Mike Norris as your head coach, somebody who they believe is going to maintain some level of continuity in terms of the tactical success that the Thorns had last year. He was a person that had a big role in their tactical approach and their analytics and everything else. He's a soccer nerd. And he's a very unassuming guy. He's a very nice guy. He doesn't fit maybe some of the traits that people imagine for like this fiery, motivational head coach. He's a by the book dude, and they believe in him. The players believe in him. They like him. And they're looking forward to playing for him. His staff is filled out now. We had an announcement today that Rob Gale and Katie Quinlan are joining the club as assistant coaches under Norris. That adds to Vitas, who's one of the assistants, obviously a former Timber, and with those two, Vitas
and Nadine Unger, of course.
And Nadine Unger.
I do remember in during the game against Louisville, the preseason game, at one moment I looked at the Thorns bench and I was like, well, there's Mike and there's Vitas and there's Nadine. It was like, feels like maybe there's one or two yet to come, and turns out there was.
Yes, there was, and they actually were. I wasn't at the preseason finale against Lorraine, but they were there coaching. It just hadn't been made official yet. So for those of you who were at the game and were like, who the heck are those people? That's them. That's Katie and Rob. They just joined the staff. So Mike finally has a full staff under him, and it will inevitably make life easier for him and improve the quality of training for all the players as they embark on this season. But it's a feeling of optimism and hunger, I think, among these players and among the people around the team. The optimism exists because why wouldn't it, right? This is an incredibly talented team with the reigning MVP. no flaws really.
Won
at
the
any
title last
position.
year, should have
Very
won the
deep.
Shield,
Yeah.
and basically running it back. I mean, why
Yeah.
wouldn't you be optimistic about that?
Exactly. And it's, in terms of their confidence, it's not like we can take it easy. We're a bunch of ballers. It doesn't matter, right? They are very hungry. They're elite level competitors. You think about people like Megan Klingenberg, Becky Sauerbrunn, Sophia Smith, Christine Sinclair, Janine Becky, who we are obviously wishing a speedy recovery from her ACL surgery. These are high level competitors, and moreover, they've seen success and they want it again and again and again. Sophia Smith told me straight up she wants to repeat as NWSL MVP. She wants to win a World Cup with the US, and she wants to repeat as an NWSL champion. That'd be a heck of a year, for a heck of a 2023, and it is very much in play, I think, for Soph, and those two of those three things for this Thorns team. So it's exciting. I don't know about your general feeling, Chris, but I'm genuinely excited,
Yeah.
as an outside objective party to watch this team this year.
For very good reason. But the real work starts now, right? As as we've discussed, these games count. These early season games are important, and they're especially important in a year in which you are going to have pretty significant disruption in the middle of the season. It's going to mostly be Challenge Cup games during the World Cup, so the impact on the regular season is going to be a little bit less, but it's still going to be really disruptive in the middle of the season for an extended stretch. And so these games are really important. And I think there is every reason for optimism. I think there is every reason for confidence. I think, I think a lot of the things that we decry on the Timber side just simply don't exist on the Thorn side. And there is a much healthier roster, and there is a much sort of healthier path forward, even notwithstanding a lot of the adversity that they've faced over the course of the last couple of years. But the work still has to start now. And so they can't let that optimism and confidence, that well-earned optimism and confidence, breed complacency. And I agree with you. I don't sense that from the team so far. I'm not particularly worried about that. That doesn't keep me up at night the way some of the goals the Timbers let in against Atlanta do. And I think there's lots and lots of reason to be heading into the season opener against the Pride, with all the belief in the world in this team. But the work still has to start now, because 3 points are on the line, and they're on the line now. They're going to be on the line in the middle of the season, and they're going to be on the line at the end of the season. And so they're if you want to repeat as NWSL champions, if you want to go win the Shield, I think these should all be very express ambitions of this team this year, because I think they're capable of it. Then that starts now. And I cannot wait, frankly, to see how it goes.
Yeah, this is a team that I think definitely leads the way in the NWSL. By no means does that mean that there are other teams that aren't as hungry, if not more so, to unseat the Thorns. They're tired of this type of talk, right? The idea that this team is unbeatable. They're bringing all these players back. You think about San Diego, you think about KC, which upgraded its roster significantly. Angel City, which will
Angel City,
be
no
right
question.
back in there. OL Reign, another one. Chicago with Mallory Swanson. I mean, there's a lot of parity and a lot of talent across this league. So, one false move, taking a couple weeks lightly, or, a bad stretch or something like that. And the Thorns not only potentially lose out on a Shield that they should win, but they put themselves in a tougher position in the playoffs. And it ends up like 2021, where they are eliminated early and probably should not have been.
And I think that's a critical point. Just because the Thorns did very well last year, they should have won the Shield, barely didn't, and then they won the title. Just because all of that happened means very little for 2023, which is where the primary focus needs to be. The Thorns don't stand astride this league like a colossus. I mean, this isn't that kind of dynamic. This is a pretty deep league. There are lots of teams that could beat the Thorns. The Thorns could miss the playoffs. I mean that is a reality.
You know what's nuts is like they were a few points from that's how tight those standings were. And this was a team that like you looked at them at the end when they stood on the top of the mountain and you were like, yep, that's the best team in the league.
And they looked like the best team in the league over the course of the season.
But
they could pretty easily miss the playoffs.
Way. Yeah, they could easily have missed the playoffs. And that is,
and they could do it again this year.
Yeah, that is the danger. So that's why you got to start strong.
So I mean, and that's why if that confidence slides into overconfidence, it should not slide into overconfidence, but B, it could be really, really damaging, because if you do drop some of these results early in the season that you shouldn't, that you should have won, that could very easily be the difference between making the playoffs and not, between having a home game in the playoffs and not, between winning the Shield and not. And so the work has to start now, and it starts against the Pride this weekend.
You think about the lineup for this team as we enter the year, pretty much same look that you were getting last year. You've got Kuika and Klingenberg as the outside backs, Kelly Hubley and Becky Sauerbrunn at the center back spots, Rocky Rodriguez and Sam Coffey in the midfield, along with, potentially somebody like Christine Sinclair if they think she's still a starter, but at this stage in her career, probably more of a substitute.
Crystal Dunn, Olivia Moultrie.
Yeah, Crystal Dunn is someone who I think will probably be the odds-on starter in an attacking midfield role, just because this is her first real full season since giving birth to Marcel, and she could continue to showcase her world-class ability. In that area, you have to think about Lindsey Horan inevitably, eventually, once the World Cup is over. If things go according to the current plan, she returns to Portland. She comes back from her loan with Lyon in the summer, and that loan ends like right in the middle of the World Cup, I think. So, she's going to factor in. She's going to compete with Crystal, with Christine Sinclair for opportunities in the midfield.
And the nice thing about Crystal is that she can play in a number of spots, right?
Yes.
And so if you want to move her to left back, you can do that. If you want to move her to an attacking wing position, you can do that. She's been successful in all of these places for club and country. And so, that is the benefit of having such a versatile player in the spot that it makes the most sense to plug Horan into, because you just have so much optionality that has upside. Not sort of optionality in terms of like, you can make it work if you need to. It's like, oh, we can do this. We can do that.
Exactly. And the quality of players does not end as you keep going up. It in fact improves tremendously. Sophia Smith's the obvious name at striker. She's going to be a world beater again in all likelihood this year. She's got everything. She's not even in her prime yet. And that's the crazy thing. People are like, well, she didn't deserve an 87 in FIFA, but she's got a 94.
Anybody actually saying that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. People are like, she should have been, they're saying she should have been higher.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Not that she should have been lower.
I was like, 87's too high. I'm like, are you kidding me?
No.
Is this a joke?
That would have
She
been
was
ridiculous.
one of the top 10 players in the world last year.
Yeah. 87's the minimum, but 94 potential, right? That's the same as Erling Haaland, right? So that's the level of player we're talking about here. And FIFA is not real life. I'm sorry to keep bringing it up, but it's a reference point lately for people, especially with the NWSL. But she's gonna tear the world apart this year. She wants to. And on either side of her, the wingers that they have right now are Morgan Weaver, who was great last year and could be even better this year. I think she's the person most primed for a major breakout season, particularly because during the World Cup stretch, she's going to be their featured attacking player. And Hina Sugita, who was pure class and efficiency last year, and after an entire year of NWSL under her belt, in that little stretch that I watched her play in that first preseason match, she looks so much more comfortable. It's not an avoidance of contact thing where she's worried about getting injured because of her frame or anything. She's leaning
clowning
into
fools.
contact. She's clowning fools is the best way to put it. she is seriously so skilled and such a high level talent that it's an embarrassment of riches for them to have her, and then to be bringing potentially Haran back into that mix with Sugita, Weaver, and Sophia Smith. I mean, my goodness.
By the way, this is a total aside. Did you see the Japan World Cup jersey that was released, I think, just this morning?
Yes, I did. The cherry blossom vibes.
Straight fire. It is
it's
phenomenal.
So cool. That's like the peak of what World Cup type jerseys should be, is like an homage to the country and its culture and the general vibes, but it's also just cool as hell, right? It's something that like they will sell a lot of those jerseys because they
Absolutely.
are seriously so cool.
I mean, shoot, anybody in the henna hive, I'm pointing at myself. It doesn't really come through in the podcast format because, audio only, but I'm pointing at myself. Like anybody in the henna hive is going to be thinking about getting one of those because they are hot.
Yeah, they're seriously so cool. And Hina Sugita is definitely going to have a lot of success, I think, in the World Cup. I think Japan is one of the teams that, people should be talking more about in terms of potentially making some noise in that World Cup. They've got a good number
Japan,
of
to
players.
me, by the way, in terms of the way I'm kind of like assessing the World Cup, Japan to me is the team that I'm not sure is going to really contend at the top end, but that I would like put all of my money on to be the most fun team in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of my money.
Yeah, it could be seriously fun from them. So like that's another thing that we've talked about, is the idea that all these different players from the Thorns are going to be starring for their countries in various capacities. And they're going to be on this massive stage. And even if the games are mostly Challenge Cup games for the Thorns, or, the subs are in there and it's not as exciting as it would be, what a great thing to be able to turn your head and watch as an alternative. Even if maybe some of the games are, it's going to be a great soccer year. Even if some of the games are at like midnight, Pacific time, or 3 a.m. Eastern for our poor folks over there. But like
our three listeners on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Your brother and mine.
Yeah. My brother, your brother, and then
my brother does not
other
listen.
Person. Oh, he does.
Your brother.
I don't think my brother listens either. So we're talking to air right now, basically. But in general, that World Cup is going to be such an incredible spectacle. And I think it being a World Cup year at this moment for NWSL is an unbelievable opportunity for continued and exponential growth of the league in terms of popularity, in terms of revenue, to be able to tout that, you're seeing all of these amazing star players, right? Well, guess where they play 90% of the time when they're not on the national team? Right here in the US of A, in the NWSL, for our teams, and
is an awesome league, by the way.
Yeah, it's a really fun league.
I think there's no debate about this. This is the most exciting year in NWSL history. The competition is really, really good. You have legit star power across the league. You have really good teams. You have finally the league and the players getting just a sliver of the respect that they deserve. You have the World Cup going on to juice things even further. This is the most exciting year in NWSL history. And I hope the Thorns are in a featured role in that most exciting year in NWSL history, because I think it is only upside and only reason for optimism and excitement.
In general, where do you see things finishing for the Thorns when it's all said and done? Do you see them as runaway Shield winners?
No.
Close Shield winners, champions? I mean, in all the factors of a season aside, potential injuries, the World Cup break, everything else, what do you see, if you could peer into your crystal ball, happening for this team?
The way I would set the level of success, I mean, the sort of successful versus unsuccessful season for the Thorns this year, is I think it's not a successful year if they don't win at least one trophy. This is a trophy winning quality team. And look, I mean, it's ridiculous to set the expectations as runaway Shield winners. I think the league is just too deep. I don't think that's going to happen. I expect them to be in the Shield race, and I expect them to win either the Shield or the title. And if they do one of those two things, or if they do both of them, that'd be nice. Then I think that this is a successful year. If they fall short on both, I think they'll be looking at the year and saying that they should have gotten more. And so I think if I'm forced to make a prediction today, I think they'll get one of the two. I've got faith in the players. I've got faith in this group. I think they have warranted that faith over and over and over again. They have fought through a ton of adversity in the course of the last year or two and came out on top. And I think there's no reason to think that won't continue. But I also think that's the expectation and with that comes pressure.
That'll wrap it up for us here on Soccer Made in Portland. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thank you to Chris Reifer, as always, for his unmatched insight. Sir, thank you, as usual. And make sure everybody to, like us, subscribe to us wherever you get your pods. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Made in PDX, at Ryan T. Clark, at Chris Reifer. And any parting thoughts here, Chris? Anything you want to share?
I loved the transition to the wrap up there. I'm just like bringing the heat, and you're just like, we're done, finished, out. Tune in next week.
Thank you so much. It's important for me to end on a high note, and when we're bringing the toasty takes and the quality analysis, my friend, it seems like an important thing to end on a high note. So that's my thoughts there.
Hence the Thorns being the second half of the podcast today.
Indeed. Thank you everybody again for joining us, and we will see you next week.